So, you think being a medieval assassin was cool? You imagine a shadowy figure sneaking across castle rooftops, flipping daggers, vanishing into the night like some ancient ninja? Real life wasn't like that. Being a medieval assassin sucked. Seriously. It was cold, lonely, dangerous, and usually ended in one of two ways: torture or death. Probably both. You didn't get cheers. You didn't get medals. You got hunted. You were a tool for powerful people who'd throw you away the second you messed up. Or worse, if you didn't mess up but just knew too much. There was no trust, no honor, and definitely no retirement plan. One bad step, one wrong face remembered you, one mission failed, and that was it. You were done. Forget what the movies tell you. No one wanted to be a medieval assassin. You didn't choose that life. That life swallowed you whole. In this video, we're going to dig into the cold, grimy truth behind the myths. We'll break down what medieval assassins actually did, how they lived, and why being one was a non-stop nightmare. It's not glamorous. It's not romantic. It's not even cool. It's brutal. Welcome to Why It Sucked to Be a Medieval Assassin and More. When you hear the word assassin, your mind probably jumps to shadowy killers in dark robes, slipping through secret tunnels, striking quickly and disappearing without a trace. But who were the real medieval assassins? And what kind of people did this job? Medieval assassins weren't like spies or soldiers. They weren't knights or noblemen with fancy armor and banners. Most were common people, or even outcasts, who had one skill: killing someone quietly and quickly. They were hired killers, spies, or agents for rulers, nobles, or secret societies who needed someone to get rid of a rival without open war. One of the earliest and most famous groups connected to the word assassin comes from the Middle East, the Nizari Ismailis, better known in history as the Hashishin. This group existed around the 11th and 12th centuries, operating mainly in Persia and Syria. They became legendary for their ability to strike fear into powerful rulers by assassinating important political figures. But here's the catch: even these famous assassins weren't heroes or legends in their own time. They were feared and hated. People whispered their name in fear, but no one wanted to be one of them. The Hashishin weren't some fancy spy network. They were desperate, trained killers, living in constant danger. In Europe, the word assassin slowly started to appear in stories and records by the late Middle Ages. Some were professional killers hired by kings or nobles to get rid of enemies quietly, especially in times when open warfare was too risky or politically messy. Others worked in the shadows for secret groups or criminal gangs. But they all shared the same dangerous life. These assassins didn't wear costumes or masks like you see in movies. Most tried to blend in with normal people because their success depended on surprise and secrecy. Sometimes they were servants, sometimes merchants, sometimes just strangers walking through the crowd. Their job was to get close enough to their target without raising suspicion, then strike and disappear before anyone knew what happened. What makes this worse is that the work was incredibly lonely. You couldn't trust anyone, not even your closest allies, because betrayal was common. Your employer might pay you one day and hand you over to their enemies the next. And if you got caught, no one would come to your rescue. Assassins were seen as criminals or worse, traitors who threatened the order of society. The job was as secret as it was deadly. Many assassins lived under fake names and moved constantly to avoid being recognized. They rarely saw their families or friends, and if they did, they had to hide their true work from them. Imagine living a life where your survival depended on never being known, never making friends, and always watching your back. Most medieval assassins were not highly trained warriors or masters of martial arts. Their training was practical, brutal, and often learned on the job. They had to be quick, quiet, and able to kill with whatever tools they had, a dagger, poison, or even bare hands. Fancy swords and weapons were a luxury they often couldn't afford or use without drawing attention. In some places, assassin work was passed down in families or secret groups, where new recruits were taught how to survive in this violent underworld. But many were just desperate people, pushed into the job by poverty or threats, forced to take lives to survive. In reality, being a medieval assassin was more about patience and nerves than action scenes. They spent hours, sometimes days or weeks, watching their target, learning routines, waiting for the perfect moment. One mistake could blow their cover, and one slip could mean death. And death wasn't just a risk from guards or angry mobs. It also came from their employers. Assassins were tools, useful only until their mission was done. Then they became liabilities. Some rulers killed their own assassins to cover their tracks. Others abandoned them to be captured and tortured to death. So, even if you succeeded, you could never be sure your life was safe. Most assassins lived in constant fear. Fear of getting caught, fear of betrayal, and fear of dying alone in a dark cell or on a battlefield. Their world was small, dark, and filled with danger from every side. Few survived long, and fewer still died peacefully. It's easy to see why no one wanted this life. But for some, there was no choice. In a world ruled by power, fear, and violence, being a medieval assassin was sometimes the only way to make a living. And while their names rarely made it into the history books, their actions shaped the fate of kingdoms and empires. So next time you hear about an assassin in the Middle Ages, remember, behind every shadowy figure was a person fighting to survive, caught in a brutal game with deadly stakes. Life for a medieval assassin wasn't about quick thrills or exciting adventures. It was slow, tense, and exhausting. The days were long, the nights even longer, and every moment was spent watching your back. Being an assassin wasn't a glamorous job. It was a constant fight just to survive. Imagine waking up every day knowing that your very existence depends on secrecy and silence. You could never let your guard down. You had to blend in with crowds, hide in shadows, and keep your identity hidden from everyone, even people you thought you could trust. Because one slip, one careless word, and your life was over. Most of the time, assassins weren't running around stabbing people. Their work was about patience. They spent hours, sometimes days, just watching their targets, learning their habits, routines, and weaknesses, where they slept, what time they left their houses, who they trusted. This kind of observation was boring, slow, and stressful, but it was necessary. During these waits, assassins had to live normal lives. They ate, worked, and interacted with others like anyone else. But inside, they were always tense, always ready to run or fight. If someone got too close or asked questions, they had to lie, sometimes invent elaborate stories. One wrong word could ruin everything. Food was simple and often poor. Assassins couldn't afford luxury or comfort. They lived in small rooms or hidden safe houses, usually with barely enough to survive. Getting sick or weak wasn't an option. Illness could ruin a mission or leave you exposed. When a mission finally came, the pressure was intense. Assassins had to be ready at any moment. Weapons were kept hidden but close. Daggers, poisons, small blades, anything they could use quickly and quietly. Noise was their enemy. Even a dropped coin or a sudden cough could alert guards. Most assassination attempts happened close to the target's home or on the streets, places where the assassin could blend in and disappear fast. They didn't have luxury weapons or fancy armor. Speed and silence were their best tools. Sometimes they poisoned food or water, which was safer but slower. Sometimes they had to get close and strike fast. After a kill, the danger wasn't over. Assassins had to escape immediately. Guards would be on alert, Townsfolk would panic, and anyone who saw the assassin could raise the alarm. Running away through narrow alleys, jumping walls, or hiding in crowds was their only chance. But getting caught was common and deadly. When not on a mission, assassins lived in constant fear. They never knew when the next job would come or if they'd survive it. Many lived alone because keeping friends or family was too risky. People close to an assassin could be targeted as punishment or bait. Loneliness was part of the job. Most assassins had no formal home. They moved from place to place, always hiding from enemies and the law. Safe houses were few and far between. Trust was rare. Even other assassins weren't always trustworthy. Some would betray their own for money or power. The physical demands were brutal. Assassins needed to be fit and quick, but also careful not to draw attention. They often traveled on foot, sometimes for miles, carrying their tools and supplies. They slept little and always lightly, ready to flee at a moment's notice. Their mental states suffered just as much as their bodies. Living with the knowledge that you're expected to kill strangers, and maybe innocent people, wears down anyone. Many assassins became cold, distant, and paranoid. Some lost their minds under the pressure. Despite all this, assassins had little choice. Poverty, coercion, or promises of reward pushed many into this life. And once in, it was hard to leave. Employers were powerful and cruel. Refusing a job could mean death. Obedience was survival. When a mission was complete, assassins rarely celebrated. Success meant more danger. They had to disappear quickly before anyone linked them to the crime. There was no glory or thanks, just the fear of the next job. Their lives were short. Most assassins didn't live past their 30s. Wounds, betrayal, disease, and exhaustion claimed many. Death wasn't just a possibility, it was expected. So, the life of a medieval assassin was filled with waiting, watching, running, hiding, and surviving. It was a lonely existence, trapped between shadow and danger, with no peace and little hope. And yet, despite all this, assassins shaped history. Their silent work toppled rulers, sparked wars, and changed the fate of nations, all while living a life no one wanted. If you think being a medieval assassin was just about sneaking around and stabbing people, think again. The biggest part of their life wasn't the killing itself. It was the constant risk of death. Every step they took, every breath they drew, could be their last. Assassins lived in a world where death wasn't a distant possibility. It was right there, looming over them all the time. They weren't just risking their lives during missions. Their whole existence was a gamble with death. On a mission, the danger was obvious. If guards caught you, you didn't just get arrested, you faced torture, public execution, or a slow, painful death in a dungeon. Medieval justice was brutal, and no assassin ever expected mercy. Sometimes, failure wasn't just death. It was torture designed to send a message to others who dared try. Even if you managed to complete your task, the risk wasn't over. Your employer might want to silence you to protect their secret, or your target's allies might hunt you down for revenge. Many assassins died not on the job, but afterward, betrayed or abandoned. The tools assassins used were crude by modern standards: daggers, short swords, poison, but they had to be quick and precise. One slip could mean the target survived, and that was usually worse than death. Surviving a failed assassination attempt meant facing furious guards who wanted you dead. Assassins often worked alone or in small groups. That meant if something went wrong, there was no backup. No one to call for help or cover your escape. You had to rely on your own skill and luck ran out quickly. Being caught was a nightmare. If you were lucky, you might be thrown in prison before being executed. If you were unlucky, you faced torture designed to break you physically and mentally. Medieval torture was horrific, things like the rack, thumbscrews, or worse. It was meant to extract secrets or punish you slowly. Even rumors of being an assassin could get you killed. Sometimes people accused rivals or enemies of being assassins just to get them arrested or executed. The suspicion alone was enough to ruin lives. The threat of death wasn't just from enemies. Disease was a constant killer in medieval times, and assassins were no exception. They traveled, met strangers, lived in poor conditions, and rarely had access to proper medicine. Illness could strike any time and kill faster than any sword. Wounds were another deadly problem. Even a small cut could get infected and become fatal without antibiotics. Assassins didn't have doctors on call, just whatever they could find or do themselves. Many died slowly from infections or gangrene. Some assassins were forced into their role after losing everything: family, home, or freedom. They had nothing left to lose, but that also meant no safety net. If they died, no one mourned. No one looked for them. Because of the constant danger, assassins rarely lived long. Many didn't make it past their 20s or 30s. Their bodies and minds broke down under the strain, and most died violent, lonely deaths. One assassin's story tells it all. After a mission went wrong, he was captured, tortured for days, and left barely alive. He survived only to be hunted down and killed months later. That was a common fate. It wasn't just physical death that assassins feared. Many suffered mental death long before their bodies gave out. The pressure, fear, and isolation wore them down until they became shells of people. In short, being a medieval assassin meant playing a deadly game with death every moment. There was no safety, no second chances, no mercy. The risk wasn't just part of the job, it was the job. That's why no one glamorized this life back then. It was hell on earth. And yet, despite the odds, some kept doing it, trapped by circumstances or driven by dark reasons. So when you think of assassins, remember, they lived on the edge of death, always one mistake away from disaster. Their lives were brief, brutal, and filled with terror. And that's why being a medieval assassin sucked. When you think of assassins, you probably imagine sleek, deadly weapons, shiny daggers, hidden blades, or maybe some fancy poison. But the reality for medieval assassins was far from that Hollywood image. Their tools were basic, often unreliable, and dangerous not just to their targets but sometimes to themselves. The most common weapon was the dagger. It was small, easy to hide, and could be used quickly in close quarters. But daggers were also limited. You had to get dangerously close to your target to use one. That meant risking being caught or attacked before you even got the chance to strike. Many assassins carried multiple daggers or small knives. If one failed to do the job, they needed a backup ready instantly. They couldn't afford to fumble or waste time. A missed attack meant death, not just for the target but for the assassin. Unlike knights or soldiers who wore heavy armor and carried big swords, assassins had to stay light and quiet. Carrying big weapons would slow them down and make them easy to spot. So they relied on small, concealable weapons that worked well for quick, silent kills. Poison was another weapon of choice, especially for targets who were heavily guarded or too powerful to approach directly. Poisoning food, drink, or even the tip of a blade allowed assassins to kill without fighting. But poisons weren't easy to come by or use safely. Many were slow-acting, so the target might suffer for hours or days. Sometimes, poison killed the wrong person by accident. And poisons were risky for the assassin too. Handling deadly chemicals without proper knowledge or equipment could poison the user. A careless mistake meant the assassin could die as easily as the victim. Assassins also used other tricks, like hidden blades sewn into clothes, garrotes for strangling quietly, or even ropes and traps. But all of these required skill and luck. One wrong move, and the assassin could be caught or killed. In some cases, Assassins had to improvise weapons from whatever they had on hand. A broken piece of glass, a heavy book, or even a coin could be turned into a deadly tool. But these homemade weapons were even more dangerous to use and harder to control. Weapon maintenance was another problem. Assassins didn't have blacksmiths or armories at their disposal. They had to keep their weapons sharp and ready on their own. A dull blade could mean failure and death. Carrying weapons also meant constant fear of being searched or caught by guards. Medieval towns and castles had strict rules about weapons. Getting caught with a dagger in your belt could lead to arrest or worse. So assassins had to hide their tools carefully and always be ready to explain if questioned. Beyond weapons, assassins needed tools to help them move unseen. Rope, grappling hooks, disguises, and sometimes even small mirrors to peek around corners were part of their kit. These tools helped them get close to their targets and escape afterward. But these tools added weight and complexity. Every extra item was a risk. If caught, they could be used as evidence or cause suspicion. Assassins had to balance being prepared with not carrying too much. Training to use these weapons wasn't easy. Many assassins learned on the job or from secret teachers. They had to practice silent killing, quick escapes, and using weapons in tight spaces. Mistakes could be deadly. The danger wasn't just for the target. Using knives and poisons in cramped places meant assassins sometimes injured themselves. A slip of the hand could lead to bleeding, infection, or accidental poisoning. Because of the risks, some assassins preferred not to kill directly. They worked as informants or saboteurs, trying to weaken their enemies without bloodshed. But when killing was required, they had to be ready with their weapons. In short, medieval assassins' tools were simple, dangerous, and often unreliable. There was no fancy gear or magic weapons, just sharp blades, deadly poisons, and a lot of risk. This made the job even tougher. They had to be skilled, careful, and lucky just to survive. Every weapon was both a lifeline and a threat. And that's why being a medieval assassin sucked. Not just because of who they had to kill, but because of the tools they had to use, and how close those tools could bring death to themselves. When most people think of assassins, they picture something glamorous, slick outfits, daring escapes, maybe even some kind of twisted honor code. But the truth is far from that. The life of a medieval assassin was filled with fear, stress, and endless pressure. There was no glory, no cheers, just a lot of dread. The job demanded constant vigilance. Assassins had to be alert every second, watching for enemies, guards, and anyone who might recognize them. They never knew who might be watching, and they couldn't afford to trust anyone. One careless word or gesture could lead to capture or death. Unlike knights or soldiers who fought openly and could count on their comrades, assassins worked alone or in tiny groups. They didn't have backup or support. That isolation created deep loneliness, which added to the mental toll. Assassins often suffered from paranoia, always worried that someone was following them or plotting against them. This fear wasn't irrational. Betrayal was common. Allies turned enemies, employers turned on their own killers, and rivals spread rumors to ruin reputations. The web of danger surrounded assassins constantly. Sleep was hard to come by. They had to sleep lightly, always ready to flee or defend themselves at a moment's notice. Exhaustion was a constant enemy. Over time, the stress built up and could break even the strongest minds. Beyond the physical danger, assassins had to live with the weight of their actions. Killing another human, even if it was their job, left marks on the soul. Many assassins struggled with guilt, nightmares, and depression. Some turned to alcohol or other escapes to numb the pain. There was no chance for a clean kill. Assassinations often involved messy, violent encounters. Sometimes targets fought back or screamed, drawing attention. Assassins had to live with the knowledge that their work caused pain and fear, not just death. Their work also meant missing out on normal life. They couldn't settle down, form lasting relationships, or trust loved ones. Family and friends had to be kept in the dark or pushed away to keep everyone safe. The stress wasn't only from the job itself. Medieval life was harsh for everyone, and assassins often came from poor or desperate backgrounds. They faced hunger, cold, and disease on top of their dangerous work. Unlike the heroes in stories, assassins didn't get recognition or rewards. They were paid poorly, if at all, and always at risk of being discarded once their usefulness ended. They had to keep moving, hiding, and fearing the next job. In some cases, the fear extended to their own employers. Assassins knew they could be killed by those who hired them just to keep secrets safe. This made trust nearly impossible. This endless cycle of fear and stress left many assassins broken before their time. They lived fast and died young, worn down by the physical and mental strain. In truth, the life of a medieval assassin was a nightmare, not a thrilling adventure. It was a dark, lonely path filled with danger and dread at every turn. So, forget the myths of cool, confident killers. The real story is one of constant fear, crushing stress, and the fight just to stay alive one more day. And that's why being a medieval assassin really sucked. Being a medieval assassin wasn't just dangerous, it was lonely in a way most people can't imagine. The world around them didn't see assassins as heroes or even as people. They were outcasts, shadow figures hated and feared by everyone. In medieval society, your reputation mattered more than almost anything else. You could be poor, a criminal, or a noble, but you had a place. Assassins? They had none. They lived in the shadows, not just physically but socially. Most people thought assassins were traitors, liars, and murderers, people who broke the rules and destroyed trust. Killing in secret was the worst kind of crime. Open fighting or battle was honorable, but sneaking in to kill someone? That was dishonorable and disgusting. Because of this, assassins were treated like criminals, even by those who hired them. Nobles who used assassins publicly denied any connection to them. They called them monsters, and rightly so, in the eyes of the law and society. This meant assassins couldn't live openly. They had to hide their work and their identity. They often took false names, wore disguises, or moved constantly. If anyone found out who they really were, they risked being shunned or worse. Families of assassins paid a price, too. If the killer's identity became known, their family could be attacked or disowned. They might be shamed or treated like criminals themselves. This pushed many assassins to cut ties completely. Even among criminals and outlaws, assassins had a bad reputation. Thieves and bandits might steal or fight, but assassins killed silently and without warning. Many saw that as cowardly or dishonorable, making assassins the lowest of the low. Because of their secretive lives, assassins often had no friends or allies. Trust was dangerous. Betrayal was common. Sometimes other assassins turned on each other to save themselves or gain favor. Isolation was their constant companion. This social isolation fed into their mental state, making fear and paranoia worse. Without a support system, they faced dangers alone, with no one to help if things went wrong. In towns and villages, rumors spread about assassins. People whispered warnings and blamed them for mysterious deaths. This fear made assassins targets not just for law enforcement but for angry mobs or revenge seekers. The law didn't just punish assassins, it hunted them. Most medieval legal systems treated secret killing as a crime worse than open violence. If caught, assassins faced harsh punishments, torture, execution, or being thrown into the worst prisons. In some places, there were special laws against poisoning or treasonous killings, crimes often linked to assassins. These laws made their work even more dangerous and their punishment more brutal. Because of this stigma, assassins rarely had chances for a better life. No honest job wanted them, and no community would accept them. They were stuck in a cycle of violence and hiding. Even when rulers secretly depended on assassins, they kept their distance. Assassins were useful tools, but also threats. A ruler might use one assassin one day and kill them the next to avoid being exposed. The social stigma followed assassins even after death. Many were buried in unmarked graves or denied proper funerals. Their names were forgotten or whispered with shame. All this made the life of a medieval assassin a lonely, dangerous path. They were outsiders in every sense, feared by enemies, shunned by society, and abandoned by those who hired them. This loneliness was as deadly as any sword or dagger. It wore them down, made trust impossible, and left them isolated in a hostile world. So when you hear about assassins in history, remember they weren't just killers. They were outcasts, living on the edge of society with no place to call home. And that's why being a medieval assassin really sucked. Being a medieval assassin meant living a life shaped by brutal training and harsh recruitment, and it was far from anything heroic or glamorous. Most assassins didn't wake up one day and decide, "I want to be a killer." Instead, many were forced or pressured into the role by desperate circumstances, powerful masters, or secret societies. Recruitment was often ruthless. Some assassins were born into secretive groups or families where killing was passed down like a trade. Others were kidnapped or coerced, sometimes as children, trained from an early age to obey without question and carry out deadly missions. The training itself was harsh and unforgiving. Unlike knights or soldiers who trained openly, assassins learned their skills in secret, often isolated from normal society. Their teachers were ruthless, focusing on survival above all else. They had to master many skills, moving silently, blending into crowds, hiding weapons, and striking quickly. Training involved long hours of physical exercises, weapons practice, and learning how to read people. But it wasn't just about fighting. Assassins had to be clever, patient, and cold. Punishments for mistakes during training were brutal. Harsh beatings, starvation, or worse were common methods to ensure obedience and toughness. This harsh discipline was designed to strip away any weakness or hesitation, making the trainee into a perfect killing machine. Many trainees never made it to become full assassins. They broke under the pressure, ran away, or were killed during training for failure. Only the strongest and most ruthless survived. Mental conditioning was just as important. Assassins were taught to suppress emotions, ignore pain, and accept death as normal. They were trained to see their targets not as people but as obstacles to be removed. This dehumanization was necessary to survive the job, but it also damaged them deeply. Their social skills were tested too. They had to lie, cheat, and manipulate without being caught. Learning how to deceive friends and enemies alike was part of their education. Unlike knights, who had some hope of honor or respect, assassins were warned that failure meant death. They were made to understand that their lives were cheap and disposable. The masters who trained them expected absolute loyalty and efficiency. Weapons training was tough and practical. They learned to use daggers, poisons, garrotes, and sometimes even unarmed combat. But they also learned how to survive with nothing, using shadows, crowds, and stealth to their advantage. Training wasn't just about killing. Assassins practiced escaping, hiding, and surviving in harsh conditions. They learned to endure hunger, pain, and cold. Their training was designed to prepare them for a life on the run, always hunted. The recruitment and training process left many assassins physically and mentally broken. Even those who survived often carried scars, both seen and unseen, for life. Once trained, Assassins rarely had a choice about what missions to take. Refusing a job could mean punishment or death. They were tools controlled by powerful people, used without concern for their lives. This harsh training and forced loyalty made assassins isolated and distrustful. They couldn't build normal relationships, and many lost any sense of identity beyond their role as killers. In reality, becoming an assassin was not about glory or freedom. It was about surviving a brutal system designed to create cold, efficient killers who had no future beyond their deadly tasks. And that's why being a medieval assassin really sucked. Assassins were expected to be loyal to their masters, their missions, and their secret orders. But in reality, loyalty was a fragile thing. The world they lived in was filled with betrayal, suspicion, and shifting alliances, making trust almost impossible. On paper, an assassin's code might have demanded absolute obedience and secrecy. But in practice, loyalties were often torn between self-preservation and duty. Assassins knew that a single mistake could lead to their death, either by their enemies or even by those who hired them. Many assassins were caught in webs of political intrigue where alliances changed overnight. They might be ordered to kill a noble one day and then be hired to protect the rival the next. This made their loyalties complicated and dangerous. Betrayal wasn't just from outside. Fellow assassins could turn on each other, selling out colleagues to gain favor or save themselves. Rival factions within secret groups often fought for power, using assassination as a tool and the assassins as pawns. Even their employers were not to be trusted. Rulers and nobles who used assassins as tools were often paranoid. They feared their own assassins, knowing they could be turned against them or reveal secrets. It was common for assassins to be discarded, imprisoned, or killed once their usefulness ended. Some assassins turned informants or double agents, playing dangerous games to survive. But these double lives came with terrible risks. Being caught as a traitor meant torture or death. The fragile nature of loyalty created constant tension. Assassins had to constantly weigh who they could trust and when. This uncertainty added to their stress and fear, making their lives even harder. Sometimes, assassins were forced to betray friends or family to prove loyalty. This cruel choice broke bonds and left many isolated and haunted by guilt. On the other hand, some assassins found ways to build loyalty within their own ranks, creating small networks of trust. These bonds were rare but crucial for survival, offering moments of humanity in a brutal world. Despite the code of loyalty, many assassins lived with the bitter knowledge that they might be betrayed at any moment. This fear shaped their actions, making them cautious and cold. The tension between loyalty and betrayal defined much of an assassin's life. They were tools in power struggles they barely controlled, forced to navigate dangerous games where one wrong move meant death. In the end, this fragile loyalty wasn't about honor or friendship. It was about survival in a ruthless world that saw assassins as expendable. And that's why being a medieval assassin really sucked. Assassins in the Middle Ages were often pawns in much larger political games. They didn't hold power themselves. Instead, they were tools wielded by kings, nobles, and secret groups who wanted to settle scores or change the balance of power without open warfare. These shadowy killers rarely chose their own missions. Powerful leaders hired them to eliminate rivals quietly, avoiding public conflict or scandal. This meant assassins were caught up in political struggles they barely understood, with little control over their fate. The political world was ruthless and unpredictable. Alliances shifted quickly, and today's employer could become tomorrow's enemy. Assassins found themselves in dangerous positions, carrying out orders that might pit them against former friends or allies. Often, assassination was a tool of fear and intimidation. Killing a rival sent a message to others, showing the reach and power of whoever hired the assassin. But this also meant assassins became targets themselves. Those who survived one mission had to worry about revenge and retaliation. Despite their deadly skills, assassins had no real power or status. They worked in secret, kept in the dark about the full political picture. Their employers used them and discarded them without a second thought. Sometimes, a successful mission meant the assassin's death, so there were no loose ends. The politics surrounding assassins were full of deception. Assassins had to navigate lies, false accusations, and shifting loyalties. They were often the first to be blamed if a plan went wrong, facing torture or execution without a fair trial. Some assassins tried to play politics themselves, using their skills and knowledge to gain influence. But this was dangerous. Power-hungry assassins were rare, and most ended up dead or betrayed. The job required walking a tightrope, carrying out deadly orders while avoiding becoming a victim. Every mission was a gamble, and the stakes were life and death. In many ways, assassins were invisible weapons, effective but expendable. Their lives and deaths shaped the political landscape, but they themselves were powerless. This lack of control made being a medieval assassin a terrifying existence. They had no say in their fate and were caught in deadly games beyond their understanding. And that's why being a medieval assassin really sucked. The life of a medieval assassin was brutal, not only because of the danger from enemies but also due to the physical toll their work took on their bodies. Injuries, disease, and exhaustion were constant companions, making survival even harder. Assassins often operated in harsh environments, crowded cities, cold castles, or rugged countryside, exposed to all kinds of risks. They traveled on foot or by horse, sometimes for days, carrying weapons and supplies. This constant movement was physically exhausting. Because their work required stealth, assassins had to be quick and agile, but the repeated strain on muscles and joints led to chronic pain and injury. They couldn't afford proper rest or medical care, so small wounds often became serious problems. Injuries were common. A slipped dagger, a guard strike, or a fall during escape could cause cuts, bruises, or broken bones. Without modern medicine, even a simple wound could become infected and deadly. Disease was another major threat. Medieval cities were dirty and crowded, perfect breeding grounds for illnesses like plague, dysentery, and tuberculosis. Assassins, moving from place to place, were exposed to these dangers constantly. Poor nutrition added to their physical decline. Assassins didn't eat well. Their food was often basic, and they rarely had access to fresh or nutritious meals. Weak bodies were more likely to get sick or injured. Fatigue was relentless. Assassins rarely slept well or for long. They had to be ready at any moment, sleeping lightly and waking often. This constant state of alertness drained their energy and wore down their immune systems. The mental stress of living with constant danger also affected their bodies. Stress can cause headaches, muscle tension, and exhaustion, all common among assassins. Despite the physical toll, assassins had to keep moving and working. There was no time to heal or recover. Injured assassins often kept going until their bodies gave out. Many died young, worn down by wounds, disease, and exhaustion. Their bodies betrayed them as much as their enemies did. This harsh physical reality was a daily struggle that most medieval people never faced. But for assassins, it was part of the job. And that's why being a medieval assassin really sucked. The life of a medieval assassin wasn't just about danger and physical pain. It was a heavy mental burden as well. Living day after day with the knowledge that your job was to kill, often in secret and without mercy, took a serious toll on the mind. Most assassins lived with fear. Fear of being caught by guards or enemies. Fear of betrayal by those they trusted. Fear that every shadow might hide a threat. This constant state of alertness left many exhausted and paranoid. Killing another person, even when ordered to do so, could weigh heavily on the conscience. Many assassins struggled with guilt and nightmares. The faces of their victims haunted their thoughts, especially when those victims were innocent or close to their own age. The secrecy required made it hard to form real connections with others. Assassins had to keep their work hidden, even from family and friends. This isolation fed loneliness and depression. Some assassins turned to alcohol or other ways to numb their pain, but these only made things worse in the long run. Without support, many suffered in silence. The mental stress also made assassins vulnerable to mistakes. Paranoia could lead to mistrust, causing them to isolate themselves further. Anxiety and fear could slow their reactions, putting them in danger. Living with death so close every day also meant many assassins struggled to find meaning in their lives. Some became numb or detached, while others developed a twisted sense of purpose to survive. The mental toll didn't end when the job was done. Assassins who survived faced the challenge of returning to normal life, if such a thing was even possible. Many couldn't escape the trauma and lived with it for years. For many, the psychological scars were as damaging as any physical injury. The constant fear, guilt, and loneliness made the life of a medieval assassin a heavy burden to carry. And that's why being a medieval assassin really sucked. Failing a mission as a medieval assassin wasn't just a setback, it was often a death sentence. Unlike modern stories where a hero might escape a failed job, medieval assassins faced brutal consequences that could mean torture, public execution, or worse. The stakes were life and death every single time. Imagine this. You've been hired to eliminate a powerful noble or a rival lord. You've spent days or weeks tracking your target, studying their routines, planning the perfect moment to strike. Your heart races as you get close, but something goes wrong. Maybe a guard spots you. Maybe the target senses danger. Maybe your weapon fails you at the crucial second. Now, instead of slipping away into the shadows, you're caught. You're dragged before the local lord or thrown into a dungeon. What happens next? There was no second chance for medieval assassins. The punishments were harsh and designed to make an example out of you, to scare others away from trying the same thing. Torture was common. The medieval world was brutal, and torturing prisoners was sadly normal. Assassins could face the rack, where their bodies were slowly stretched until joints popped. They might be subjected to thumbscrews, crushing their fingers, or worse, being burned, disemboweled, or blinded. Torture wasn't just about punishment, it was about extracting information. Who hired you? Who else was involved? What other plots were planned? Many assassins died under torture, and those who survived were often broken in mind and body. Public executions followed, sometimes slow and agonizing. Hanging, beheading, or being drawn and quartered were common. These were terrifying spectacles meant to deter others from taking the assassin's path. Sometimes, failure meant being sold off into slavery or thrown into the worst prisons, where death by disease or starvation was likely. The medieval justice system wasn't interested in fairness for assassins. They were seen as criminals and enemies of the state. Not all failed missions ended in capture. Some assassins managed to escape but lost their reputation and standing. In their world, failure was shameful and dangerous. Employers stopped trusting them. They might never get another job, which often meant starvation or worse. There were stories of assassins who were hunted by their own employers after a failure. These masters didn't want loose ends or potential threats. So, a failed assassin could find themselves betrayed and abandoned, left to fend for their life against hired killers or angry guards. The mental toll of failure was just as harsh as the physical. Surviving a botched mission meant living with constant fear. Fear of capture, fear of betrayal, and fear of death. Many assassins who failed became paranoid and unstable, which only made survival harder. Failure wasn't just a personal tragedy, it could have political consequences, too. A failed assassination might embolden enemies, shift alliances, or spark open conflict. The pressure on assassins to succeed was enormous, and the cost of failure was devastating. Some medieval assassins tried to avoid direct killings for this reason, preferring sabotage or poison that offered more distance and less risk of immediate capture. But even these methods weren't foolproof. Poisons could be detected, and failures still meant death. Despite all this, failure was common. Assassination was messy and unpredictable. Targets moved, plans fell apart, and luck ran out. No assassin was perfect. The stories of failed assassins remind us that their lives were fragile and terrifying. Success didn't guarantee safety, and failure almost always meant doom. So, when you hear tales of medieval assassins slipping through the night, remember the very real chances they faced of being caught, tortured, and executed. And that's why being a medieval assassin really sucked. You might think that once a medieval assassin finished their job, they could finally relax, maybe even retire quietly somewhere. But the truth was far from that. For most assassins, there was no retirement. No peaceful old age or calm life after the danger. Their lives were a non-stop cycle of fear, hiding, and running, often until the very end. Why was that? Because an assassin's work was secret and dangerous, not just to their targets, but to themselves. The people who hired them rarely trusted them. Even if the mission was a success, the assassin was often seen as a liability. They knew too much, had secrets that could get powerful people in trouble, and might become a threat if they decided to talk. So, instead of a reward or a pension, many assassins faced betrayal from their own masters. After their mission, they were often hunted, imprisoned, or killed to make sure their secrets stayed hidden. The same people who paid them to kill would then pay others to kill them. This meant that for many assassins, finishing a job was just the start of a new kind of danger, a desperate fight for survival. They had to disappear quickly, changing their names, moving to new places, and cutting ties with everyone they knew. Living in hiding wasn't easy. Assassins couldn't go back to their families or old friends. These connections could be used against them or put loved ones in danger. So many assassins lived alone, constantly afraid that someone would find them. Without a place to call home, assassins depended on safe houses, secret allies, or the kindness of strangers, if they were lucky. But trust was rare. Betrayal could come from anywhere, and assassins had to be constantly on guard. Some tried to start new lives, working honest jobs, or hiding in plain sight. But their pasts followed them. Rumors, old enemies, or the guilt of their actions made peace impossible. Many found themselves drawn back into the world of violence, either forced or by choice. Others became outlaws, criminals, or mercenaries, taking whatever dangerous jobs they could find to survive. Their skills made them valuable, but the risks never went away. Mental health was a huge problem for former assassins. Years of fear, violence, and loneliness left deep scars. Some turned to alcohol or drugs to numb the pain, while others became bitter and violent. Few found forgiveness or peace. In rare cases, assassins were able to find protection from powerful patrons or enter secret orders where they were given some safety. But these arrangements were fragile and often came with strict rules and limits on freedom. The fear of death didn't leave assassins even in old age. Many died violently, hunted by enemies, or betrayed by allies. Others disappeared into history, their fates unknown but likely grim. Because of this, the life of a medieval assassin was not just about the mission. It was about surviving the consequences of that mission for as long as possible, often with no hope of a better future. In the end, being a medieval assassin was a brutal, lonely existence from start to finish. There was no retirement plan, no safe haven, and no happy ending. And that's why being a medieval assassin really sucked. Being an assassin in the Middle Ages was not just a deadly profession, it was a harsh lifestyle that affected every part of a person's life, including their family. The hidden costs of this dangerous career often extended far beyond the assassin themselves, reaching into the lives of those they loved most. First, there was the constant need for secrecy. Assassins had to hide their work from everyone, even their own families. Revealing the truth could put loved ones in danger, making them targets for revenge or punishment. So, many assassins lived double lives, pretending to be ordinary citizens while secretly carrying out deadly missions. This secrecy created distance and distrust. Families couldn't understand the assassin's life, and assassins couldn't share their fears or struggles. Over time, this silence could break bonds and isolate everyone involved. The danger was very real. Enemies of the assassin's employers often targeted family members to get to the assassin. Kidnapping, threats, or violence against relatives were common tactics to force assassins to stop or betray their masters. Because of this, many assassins chose, or were forced, to leave their families behind. Some abandoned their homes to protect their loved ones from harm. Others lost their families because of the dangerous world they lived in, whether through death, exile, or separation. The assassin's lifestyle also made starting or maintaining a family difficult. Constant movement, fear of discovery, and the need for secrecy didn't leave room for stable relationships. Marriages and partnerships were risky and often short-lived. Children of assassins faced their own challenges. If the family's secret was discovered, children could be shunned, harmed, or recruited into the deadly profession themselves. Growing up in fear and uncertainty shaped their lives in profound ways. Some assassin families passed down their deadly trade from one generation to the next. This created secret dynasties bound by loyalty and shared danger but trapped in cycles of violence and fear. For many assassins, the choice to enter the profession was linked to family survival. Poverty, threats, or coercion pushed them into this life. But this came at the cost of their family's safety and well-being. The emotional toll was heavy. Assassins often carried guilt and sorrow over the harm their lives caused their loved ones. They faced impossible choices between duty and family, survival and love. In the end, the hidden cost of being a medieval assassin extended far beyond the individual. It was a life that broke families, destroyed trust, and left scars that lasted generations. And that's why being a medieval assassin really sucked, not just for the killer, but for everyone around them. Being a medieval assassin was without doubt one of the toughest jobs around, but how did it compare to other dangerous roles of the time? Was it worse than being a soldier, a thief, or even a plague doctor? Understanding this helps us see why assassins often had the worst of it, facing risks and challenges that were unique and brutal. First, let's think about knights and soldiers. They had weapons, armor, and fought openly in battles or wars. They had comrades to watch their backs and a chance at glory or honor, even if they died. Injuries were common, but soldiers had armies, commanders, and clear roles. Assassins, on the other hand, worked alone or in small groups. They had no armor, no shield, and no backup. Their battles were secret, one-on-one fights where being caught meant torture or death, not a heroic burial. Next, consider thieves and bandits. They lived outside the law, stealing from rich travelers or towns. Thieves were also risky jobs, but often thieves had networks or gangs, places to hide, and could sometimes negotiate or bribe their way out. Assassins didn't have that luxury. They were enemies of everyone, feared and hunted. Even criminals saw assassins as dangerous and untrustworthy. What about mercenaries or spies? Mercenaries fought for pay but often had armies and a chain of command. Spies gathered information but tried to avoid fighting. Assassins were a mix. They gathered intel, yes, but their job was to kill. Killing quietly in secret without being caught. This meant the risk of death was constant and immediate. Then there were plague doctors and healers during epidemics. Their lives were dangerous, dealing with deadly diseases daily, with little protection. They faced death from illness, not enemy swords. Their work was vital but filled with fear and social isolation. Assassins shared that isolation but added the risk of violent death and betrayal. Farmers and peasants faced hard lives with famine and harsh working conditions but didn't usually face daily threats of death or betrayal. Assassins had none of the stability or community that even the poorest peasants enjoyed. So, when compared to other medieval roles, assassins faced a unique combination of extreme risks: the threat of violent death, social isolation, betrayal, and harsh living conditions. No army, no gang, no support system, just constant danger and fear. This made being a medieval assassin arguably the worst life imaginable at the time. And that's why being a medieval assassin really sucked. Being a medieval assassin is often glamorized in stories, games, and movies. We see them as cool, mysterious figures who move effortlessly through shadows, skilled in martial arts, and always one step ahead. But the real story? It's very different and much worse. Movies show assassins as heroes or anti-heroes, with slick moves and stylish weapons. They fight villains, save the day, or sometimes operate in a moral gray zone that makes them interesting. But real medieval assassins weren't superheroes. They weren't in control of their lives or their missions. They were tools, often poor and desperate, hired to do dirty work with little training, no backup, and constant danger. Popular culture tends to ignore the mental and physical toll. We see assassins walking away from explosions, but in reality, they were exhausted, injured, and terrified all the time. There were no slow-motion escapes or perfect kills. Instead, there was fear, mistakes, betrayal, and often death. Movies make assassination look clean and precise, but in truth, it was messy. Assassins dealt with blood, screams, and chaos. Many targets fought back or escaped, turning the job into a dangerous chase. Sometimes innocents were caught in the crossfire, or the assassin accidentally killed the wrong person. In games and books, assassins have secret codes of honor, mysterious guilds, and elaborate rituals. Real medieval assassins had no such luxuries. They were often outcasts, criminals, or slaves forced into the role. Their codes were about survival, secrecy, and obedience, nothing romantic or noble. The tools of the trade are also exaggerated. Hidden blades and poisons in fiction are neat and safe. The reality was using dull knives, risky poisons that could backfire, and weapons that needed close contact. Assassins often risked self-injury or poisoning themselves. Training in stories is quick and cinematic. Real training was brutal, repetitive, and lonely. It involved harsh punishments, long waits, and no guarantees of success or survival. Assassins in fiction usually have support, friends, mentors, or networks. Real assassins often had no one to rely on except themselves. Trust was rare and betrayal common. Ultimately, popular culture creates a romantic myth that makes assassination seem exciting and controlled. The truth is harsh, brutal, and filled with fear. Understanding the real story shows us how much medieval assassins suffered and why their lives were far from glamorous. And that's why being a medieval assassin really sucked. You might wonder, if being a medieval assassin was so dangerous, lonely, and brutal, why would anyone choose this life? Why would someone agree to become a secret killer, constantly on the edge of death and distrust? The answer is complex, and it often comes down to desperate circumstances and limited choices. First, poverty played a huge role. In the Middle Ages, most people lived in harsh conditions with few opportunities to improve their lives. For many, becoming an assassin was a way to escape grinding poverty or starvation. It was a job that paid, sometimes well, and offered a chance to survive when other options were closed. Some were born into this life. Assassin roles were sometimes inherited or passed down in families or secret groups. From a young age, children were trained in deadly skills, with no choice but to follow the path laid out for them. For these people, assassination wasn't a career choice, it was their fate. Others were forced or tricked into becoming assassins. Powerful rulers or secret societies might kidnap or coerce individuals into training. Refusal often meant death or worse for them or their families. In this way, becoming an assassin was sometimes a forced survival strategy. Revenge and personal grudges also pushed people into this life. In a world without modern justice systems, some people turned to assassination to settle scores. Becoming an assassin gave them the power to strike back against enemies, oppressors, or rivals. This was dangerous, but sometimes the only way to survive or gain respect. Some saw assassination as a form of power in a world where they had none. Knights, nobles, and rulers held most of the power openly. For common people, especially those born poor or without status, being an assassin offered a way to influence events, even if from the shadows. It was a harsh and risky form of empowerment. Religious or political motives also played a role. Some assassins worked for secret religious groups or revolutionary movements. They believed their deadly missions served a greater cause or justice. While this didn't make the job less dangerous, it gave their lives purpose. Many assassins were also motivated by the promise of reward, money, land, or protection. Powerful employers sometimes promised wealth or status in exchange for their deadly services. But these promises were often empty or short-lived, with most assassins left abandoned after a mission. Despite the risks, the job's secrecy and the chance to wield deadly power attracted some. For those who felt powerless or desperate, assassination was a way to take control, even if temporarily. But choosing this life came with costs: loss of freedom, constant fear, and social isolation. Many assassins lived with regret, loneliness, and trauma, caught in a cycle that was hard to escape. In the end, becoming a medieval assassin was rarely a free choice. It was a desperate decision driven by poverty, coercion, revenge, or belief. And once chosen, it was nearly impossible to leave. And that's why being a medieval assassin really sucked. Being a medieval assassin was a secretive and dangerous job, but many of them left behind legacies that echo through history even today. While their lives were often short and brutal, the impact of their actions shaped politics, warfare, and espionage in ways few other roles could. Assassins were part of some of the most dramatic and pivotal moments in medieval history. Their work altered the fate of kings, nobles, and entire nations. By eliminating key figures, they shifted power balances, sparked wars, and sometimes prevented them. Though hidden from the spotlight, assassins influenced history's course from the shadows. One of the most famous early assassin groups was the Hashishin, active in the Middle East during the 11th and 12th centuries. Their name even inspired the modern word assassin. They were known for striking fear into powerful rulers and for their disciplined, secretive methods. Their legacy remains a symbol of covert warfare and political intrigue. In Europe, assassinations shaped political struggles, especially during the chaotic times of feudal disputes, royal rivalries, and religious conflicts. Assassins were tools for nobles who wanted to eliminate rivals without open battle, often changing the outcome of key events. Their methods influenced the development of espionage and intelligence work. The need for secrecy, disguise, and infiltration pioneered tactics still used by spies today. Assassins were the early masters of undercover work, blending skills of stealth, observation, and deception. The harsh lives of assassins also warn us about the cost of such violence. While their actions were sometimes seen as necessary or justified, the personal price was immense. Their stories remind us of the human cost behind the political games. Assassins also contributed to the myths and legends that survive in culture. From stories of shadowy killers to secret societies, their lives became the basis for many tales in books, films, and games, shaping how we imagine the past. Today, the legacy of medieval assassins continues in discussions about ethics, politics, and power. Their existence raises questions about the use of violence for political ends and the sacrifices made by those caught in the middle. Understanding their legacy helps us appreciate the complexities of medieval history, not just the battles and kings but the hidden players whose deadly work shaped the world. And that's why being a medieval assassin really sucked, but also why their story still matters. Being a medieval assassin wasn't just about sneaking through shadows and taking lives. It was a brutal existence full of fear, pain, and struggle from beginning to end. When we look at the bigger picture, it's clear that being an assassin in those times simply sucked for every reason you can imagine. The day-to-day reality was grim. They lived on the edge of society, constantly hiding their true identities and actions. This meant no friends, no family, no sense of belonging. Their lives were filled with loneliness and isolation. Physically, their work was exhausting and dangerous. They had to be quick, silent, and deadly with primitive weapons. One wrong move could mean capture, torture, or death. Mentally, the job was even worse. They carried the weight of the lives they took, often haunted by guilt, fear, and paranoia. The constant stress could break even the toughest person. Socially, assassins were outcasts. Even those who hired them despised and feared them. They had no honor, no respect, no chance for a normal life. Financially, while some made money, many were exploited, forced into the role by poverty or coercion. There was no retirement plan or safety net. Politically, they were pawns, used and discarded by the powerful without remorse. Loyalty was fragile and betrayal common. Despite their deadly skills, assassins had little control over their fate. They faced risks not only from enemies but from their own masters. In summary, being a medieval assassin was a life of constant danger, fear, and suffering. There was no glamour, no glory, just a harsh, unforgiving reality. And that's why being a medieval assassin really sucked. When we think of the Middle Ages, we often picture knights, castles, and battles. But the vast majority of people back then were farmers. And life as a medieval farmer was anything but easy. In fact, it was a constant struggle just to survive. Farming in the Middle Ages was backbreaking work. Farmers spent long days in the fields, planting, tending, and harvesting crops by hand. There were no tractors, no modern tools, just simple wooden plows pulled by oxen or horses, and a lot of hard muscle power. But hard work didn't guarantee a good harvest. Farmers were at the mercy of the weather. Too much rain could flood fields and drown crops. Too little rain meant drought and failure. A single bad season could mean starvation for the whole family. Pests and diseases were another constant threat. Locusts, rats, and other pests could destroy entire fields. Crop diseases could wipe out what little farmers had managed to grow. With no pesticides or modern farming techniques, farmers had few ways to protect their crops. On top of these natural dangers, farmers had to deal with taxes and rents. Most medieval farmers didn't own their land. They rented it from nobles or the church. They had to give a large share of their harvest to their lord, often leaving them barely enough to survive. If they failed to pay, they could lose their land, be punished, or thrown into debt. This created a cycle of poverty and dependence that was hard to break. Life on the farm was tough year-round. In the winter, farmers faced cold, hunger, and the threat of disease. They had little food stored, and work slowed but never stopped. They had to care for animals, repair tools, and prepare for the next planting season. Families worked together, with everyone from children to elders helping out. But even with all hands on deck, the workload was enormous. Medical care was almost non-existent. Illnesses, injuries, and infections were often fatal. Farmers lived with constant pain, sickness, and the threat of early death. Despite all this, farmers were the backbone of medieval society. Their work fed everyone from peasants to kings. Without them, cities wouldn't exist, armies couldn't fight, and society would collapse. But for the farmers themselves, life was a daily battle against nature, poverty, and hardship. They had little control over their fate and few opportunities to improve their lives. In many ways, being a medieval farmer was living life on the edge. One bad season, one disease outbreak, one bad decision away from disaster. And that's why being a medieval farmer really sucked. When you think of spies today, you might imagine slick agents with gadgets, secret codes, and thrilling missions. But being a medieval spy was nothing like James Bond. In fact, it was just as dangerous and miserable as being an assassin, sometimes even worse. Medieval spies didn't have fancy technology. They relied on whispers, secret meetings, and their ability to blend into crowds. Their work was about gathering information without being seen or caught. But the risks were enormous. If caught, spies were tortured, executed, or disappeared forever. Like assassins, spies lived in constant fear. They could trust no one, not even their closest contacts. One slip could mean death or betrayal. They had to lie constantly, invent stories, and hide their true identity, even from friends and family. Their jobs were lonely. They moved from town to town, rarely staying in one place long. They had no safety net and no one to rely on. They often lived in squalor, with little pay and no recognition. Spies also faced terrible mental strain. Living a double life, constantly under pressure to find secrets, took a huge toll. Many suffered from paranoia, anxiety, and exhaustion. Unlike assassins, spies didn't kill, but their work could lead to death for others, and sometimes for themselves. Their information could start wars or cause brutal reprisals. They carried the burden of that power but without any glory. The social stigma was harsh. If discovered, spies were called traitors, liars, and worse. Their families might be punished too. Trust was impossible and friendships were rare. Despite the dangers, some became spies out of desperation, loyalty, or coercion. They had few choices in a world ruled by power and fear. So, being a medieval spy was a grim, dangerous existence, just as bad as being an assassin. No honor, no peace, just constant danger and a life lived in shadows. And that's why being a medieval spy really sucked. When a medieval assassin was caught, their fate was almost always grim. Unlike common criminals, assassins were viewed as more dangerous and dishonorable. Their capture rarely meant a fair trial or a chance for mercy. Instead, it meant torture, humiliation, and a slow, painful death. The medieval justice system was harsh, especially towards those who threatened rulers and the established order. Assassins, by definition, were killers who worked in secret, breaking the rules of warfare and society. They were considered traitors and enemies of the state. Once arrested, assassins were often thrown into dark, filthy dungeons with little light or food. These conditions were meant to break their spirits before the physical punishment began. Torture was the standard method of interrogation and punishment. Medieval torture was designed not only to extract information but also to punish and terrify. The rack was a common device. It stretched the victim's body painfully, dislocating joints and causing unbearable agony. Other methods included the thumbscrew, crushing fingers and toes slowly, the Iron Maiden, a coffin-like device lined with spikes, and the breaking wheel, where limbs were shattered before the victim was left to die slowly. Poisoning, burning, mutilation, and public humiliation were also used. These punishments served as warnings to others who might consider similar acts. The goal was not just to kill assassins but to make their deaths an example. Public executions were common, often carried out in marketplaces or near city gates to ensure everyone saw the consequences of secret killing. Families of assassins also suffered. They might be fined, imprisoned, or exiled. Sometimes relatives were tortured or executed to punish or prevent revenge. Despite the horror, some assassins refused to betray their masters, enduring torture silently or even choosing death over giving up secrets. For those who survived torture, the physical and mental scars were lifelong. Many became broken shadows of their former selves, unable to continue in their deadly trade. The brutal treatment of captured assassins reflects how feared and despised they were. Their lives were not valued by anyone, neither enemies, employers, nor society. Being caught as a medieval assassin was a nightmare worse than death itself. And that's why being a medieval assassin really sucked. It's something most people take for granted, a bond between friends, family, or colleagues that makes life easier, safer, and more meaningful. But for medieval assassins, trust was nearly impossible. Their world was built on secrecy, betrayal, and fear, and that made every relationship a dangerous game. Assassins lived in the shadows, moving through a web of lies and hidden motives. They could never reveal who they really were or what they did. Even those closest to them, their employers, allies, or fellow assassins, were often suspects. This lack of trust wasn't paranoia. It was reality. Betrayal was common. Masters who hired assassins might kill them afterward to cover their tracks. Fellow assassins could turn on each other to gain favor or protect themselves. Enemies posed constant threats, watching and waiting. Every word spoken had to be measured. Every relationship was fragile. Sharing too much could mean death. So assassins kept secrets even from their closest companions. Friendships were shallow, and loyalty was conditional. This code of silence extended beyond words. Assassins couldn't keep records or speak openly about missions. Messages were passed in riddles or codes. Disguises, false names, and secret signs were everyday tools. Living with such secrecy was exhausting. Assassins had to constantly watch for lies, traps, or hidden agendas. Trust was a luxury few could afford. This atmosphere made loneliness and isolation common. Assassins were often cut off from families and communities, forced to live double lives. Their isolation fed fear and mental strain. The constant fear of betrayal shaped their actions. Many assassins were cold, suspicious, and ruthless, willing to kill to protect their secrets. Yet, within some groups, small circles of trust formed. These rare bonds were crucial for survival. In secret orders or families, loyalty and silence were sacred, binding members together. Still, the risk of betrayal never fully disappeared. Even the strongest trust could be shattered by fear or greed. This code of silence was a survival tool but also a prison. It protected assassins but kept them trapped in fear and loneliness. Understanding this helps us see why the life of a medieval assassin was so hard, not just physically but emotionally. And that's why being a medieval assassin really sucked. Life as a medieval assassin was not just mentally draining, it was brutal on the body. The constant physical demands, the dangers of injury, and the threat of disease made survival a daily battle. Their bodies carried the scars and wear of a life spent on the edge, with no chance to rest or recover properly. Every mission required stealth, speed, and endurance. Assassins had to move quietly through cities, forests, or castles, often on foot, sometimes for miles. This meant hours of walking, running, climbing, and hiding, sometimes with little food or water. Carrying weapons, tools, and sometimes disguises added weight and limited mobility. Every movement had to be precise. One wrong step could cause injury or alert guards. Fatigue was a constant companion. Injuries were common and dangerous. A cut or bruise could become infected without proper care, leading to serious illness or death. Even small wounds slowed assassins down and made them vulnerable. Assassins rarely had access to doctors or medicine. They relied on herbal remedies, basic first aid, or luck. Many injuries were left untreated, leading to chronic pain or disability. Disease was another constant threat. Medieval cities and towns were crowded and dirty. Poor sanitation spread illnesses like plague, typhus, and dysentery. Assassins, moving between places and living in hiding, were exposed to these dangers daily. Malnutrition and exhaustion weakened their bodies further. Food was often scarce or of poor quality. Without proper nutrition, the body's ability to heal or fight disease dropped drastically. Sleep deprivation was another major problem. Assassins had to stay alert, sleeping lightly and for short periods. This constant lack of rest impaired their judgment, slowed reflexes, and drained energy. Over time, the physical strain wore assassins down. Chronic pain, infections, and fatigue made their work harder and more dangerous. Many didn't live past their 30s. The physical toll extended beyond the mission. Long-term health problems from untreated injuries and stress affected their quality of life. Some assassins became crippled or unable to work before their deaths. Despite these challenges, assassins had to keep going. Their survival depended on being physically fit and ready at all times. Rest or recovery was a luxury few could afford. This relentless physical hardship was a key reason why being a medieval assassin really sucked. It wasn't just about the danger of killing, it was about the daily battle to keep their bodies alive and working. And that's why the life of a medieval assassin was so brutal. When you think about medieval assassins, it's easy to imagine the moment of the kill, the silent strike, the sudden disappearance. But what happened after? How did assassins escape the chaos and the furious hunt that followed? Escape was as important as the kill itself. A failed escape often meant capture, torture, or death. For medieval assassins, slipping away unseen was the difference between life and a brutal end. Unlike knights who fought openly on battlefields or soldiers who had backup, assassins worked alone or in small groups. Once their target was down, they had no army to protect them, only their skill, speed, and sometimes a bit of luck. So how did they manage to disappear so effectively in an era without cars, radios, or modern communication? One key was preparation. Assassins didn't just plan how to kill, they planned how to vanish. Before a mission, they studied escape routes, safe houses, and hiding spots. They knew the layout of cities, alleys, forests, and roads. This knowledge was vital. Disguises played a huge role. Assassins often changed clothes immediately after a kill, swapping weapons and masks for common garments. This helped them blend into crowds or pose as merchants, servants, or travelers. Crowds and chaos were their allies. Assassins struck during busy markets, festivals, or noisy streets where confusion made it easier to vanish. Noise, smoke, or distraction gave them precious seconds to slip away. Travel by night was common. Darkness offered cover and made it harder for pursuers to spot them. But traveling in the dark also meant dangers. rough terrain, wild animals, or patrols. Assassins had to balance stealth with safety. Assassins often used secret passages or tunnels, hidden routes beneath castles or cities. These gave a fast and secret way out but were known only to few. If caught, assassins used tricks, throwing dust in pursuers' eyes, setting traps, or using smoke bombs, early forms of distraction. Sometimes, they fought fiercely, using quick, brutal attacks to break free. Safe houses were essential. These were hidden places owned by allies or secret groups where assassins could rest, hide weapons, and plan their next move. Safe houses were scattered across cities and countryside, forming a network that supported their work. Messages and signals helped coordinate escapes. Simple signs, like marks on walls or flickering candles, warned of danger or showed where to go. Sometimes, assassins disappeared for years, moving from place to place, constantly changing identities. This was exhausting but necessary. They couldn't risk being recognized by enemies or former employers. Despite all these tactics, many assassins were caught or killed trying to escape. Pursuit was relentless, with rewards offered for capture. Townspeople, guards, and rival assassins all hunted them. The physical and mental toll of escape was enormous. Assassins often traveled hungry, cold, and injured, with no time to heal or rest. Their survival depended on sharp instincts, quick thinking, and sheer determination. The life of a medieval assassin was a constant race, not just to kill but to live. And that's why being a medieval assassin really sucked. When we think about medieval assassins, we usually picture solitary figures, moving in the shadows alone. But the reality was often more complicated. Many assassins had families, wives, children, siblings, people they loved and worried about. And this deadly lifestyle came with a heavy hidden cost for those families. First, the nature of assassination work meant secrecy and danger didn't just affect the assassin, they reached deep into their families' lives. Because assassins had to hide who they really were, families often lived in fear and uncertainty. They might know something was wrong, but never the full truth. Secrecy was a double-edged sword. To protect their loved ones, assassins kept their work hidden, even from spouses or children. This created distance and mistrust at home. Families often felt isolated, confused, or abandoned. The constant risk of violence meant families were targets too. Enemies of the assassin or their employers sometimes attacked relatives to get to the assassin. Threats, kidnappings, and violence against family members were common. In some cases, entire families were punished for the actions of one assassin. They could be fined, exiled, or imprisoned. This collective punishment was meant to deter others and punish those connected to the assassin. The stress on families was immense. Living in fear of discovery, attack, or betrayal wore down relationships. Children might grow up without a father or mother, either because of death, disappearance, or secrecy. For women married to assassins, life was especially hard. They had to manage households alone, raise children, and hide painful truths. Some women were aware of their husband's work and lived with constant anxiety. Others were kept in the dark, only learning of the danger after it was too late. Some assassin families passed down their deadly skills and secrets through generations. Children might be trained from a young age, growing up in a world of secrecy and danger. While this created tight bonds, it also trapped families in cycles of violence and fear. Others tried to escape the assassin's life, moving far away or cutting ties. But leaving the deadly world was often impossible. Old enemies, debts, or loyalties followed them. The emotional toll was heavy. Assassins carried guilt for the risks their family faced. Families lived with loss, fear, and uncertainty daily. In literature and history, assassin families rarely get the spotlight. But understanding their struggles helps us see the full cost of the assassin's life, not just on the killer but on those they loved. Being a medieval assassin meant living in a dangerous world where your family could suffer as much as you. This hidden cost was one of the many reasons why the life really sucked. When you hear stories about medieval assassins, you might imagine shadowy figures acting on their own, motivated by revenge or personal ambition. But in reality, most assassins were little more than political puppets, used and discarded by the powerful nobles who controlled the medieval world. In the Middle Ages, power was everything. Kings, queens, lords, and barons were locked in constant battles for territory, influence, and survival. War was expensive, dangerous, and unpredictable. So many rulers turned to secret methods to eliminate rivals without open conflict. Assassination was one such tool. Nobles hired assassins to kill enemies quietly, avoiding public bloodshed and the political fallout of open war. This allowed rulers to shift power quickly and secretly. But it also meant that assassins were caught in a deadly game, with little control over their fate. These political masters saw assassins as useful tools, nothing more. They were paid for their services, then often discarded, silenced, or killed once their job was done. Keeping an assassin alive was risky. They knew too much and could become threats themselves. Assassins didn't have any real power or say in politics. They followed orders without question, often without knowing the full plan. Their missions were just small parts of larger schemes they couldn't control or even understand. Loyalty to a noble was fragile. Assassins were expected to be loyal, but nobles were quick to betray them if it suited their needs. An assassin who failed or who became inconvenient might find themselves hunted by the very people who once employed them. This constant danger meant assassins lived in fear, not just of enemies but of their employers. Trust was rare, and betrayal was common. Many assassins were double-crossed, imprisoned, or executed by the nobles who hired them. The political use of assassins also created chaos. Killing a rival could spark wars, revenge killings, or unrest. Nobles sometimes used assassination to destabilize regions or spread fear, making life even harder for common people. Some assassins tried to navigate this dangerous political landscape for their own survival, forming alliances or playing nobles against each other. But this was risky, and few succeeded. The lives of assassins show us how ruthless medieval politics were, where human lives were expendable tools for power struggles. So, the story of medieval assassins is not just about shadowy killers, but about the dangerous world of political puppetry where they had little control and faced constant threats. And that's why being a medieval assassin really sucked. When you think about medieval assassins, the first thing that comes to mind might be the act of killing, the danger, the secrecy, the thrill. But what's often forgotten is the enormous mental burden these assassins carried every single day. Behind the silence and shadows was a mind haunted by guilt, fear, and loneliness. Killing for a living isn't easy, even if you're ordered to do it. Assassins had to take lives. Sometimes those of innocent people, sometimes even friends or strangers, and then live with the consequences. This wasn't a quick, painless job. It was brutal and messy, and the emotional scars ran deep. Many assassins struggled with guilt. They might try to justify their actions, saying it was for survival or loyalty, but deep down, the weight of each death pressed heavily on their conscience. Nightmares, flashbacks, and haunting memories followed them like shadows. Fear was a constant companion too. Assassins lived in terror of being caught, betrayed, or killed. This fear wasn't just about physical death. It was also fear of betrayal by employers, fear of losing what little they had left, and fear of a lonely, hopeless life. The secrecy that assassins had to maintain made their mental health worse. They couldn't talk openly about their struggles. Confiding in others meant risking exposure. This isolation increased feelings of loneliness and despair. Many assassins developed paranoia. Every stranger might be an enemy, every friend a traitor. This made trusting anyone nearly impossible, pushing them further into isolation. Some assassins turned to unhealthy coping mechanisms, alcohol, drugs, or violence, to numb the pain. These often made things worse, creating cycles of self-destruction. Despite the harshness, some assassins found moments of hope or meaning. Some believed they were serving a greater cause, protecting a kingdom, punishing tyrants, or seeking justice. This gave them a reason to keep going, even when the burden felt unbearable. Others formed close bonds with a few trusted allies, finding rare support in an unforgiving world. These connections could help them survive the mental strain, though such relationships were fragile and risky. The mental toll of assassination work meant many assassins didn't live long, not just physically, but psychologically. Depression, anxiety, and trauma claimed countless lives, often long before swords or arrows did. Their stories remind us that behind every shadowy figure was a human being struggling with the cost of their actions. So, when you hear about medieval assassins, remember the mental scars they carried, the guilt and fear that haunted them. And that's why being a medieval assassin really sucked. The life of a medieval assassin wasn't something one simply chose casually. It required brutal training and harsh preparation, shaping ordinary people into deadly killers. This training was unlike that of knights or soldiers. It was secretive, relentless, and designed to break down the trainee mentally and physically. Many assassins started young. Some were born into assassin families or secret societies, learning from childhood that their future was tied to killing in the shadows. Others were kidnapped, forced, or coerced into training with little hope of escape. Training began with discipline. Trainees faced grueling routines to build endurance, strength, and stealth. They ran for miles, practiced silent movement, and learned how to hide in plain sight. Physical fitness was essential. Assassins had to be quick and light on their feet, able to strike and vanish without a trace. Weapons training was intense. Daggers, poisons, garrotes, and even unarmed combat were part of the curriculum. Unlike knights who trained with heavy swords and armor, assassins needed weapons that were small, concealable, and deadly at close range. They practiced stabbing, choking, and other silent killing techniques repeatedly until they became second nature. But the physical training was only part of the picture. Mental conditioning was equally harsh. Trainees were taught to suppress fear and empathy, to see their targets as obstacles, not people. This dehumanization was necessary to carry out their missions without hesitation. Discipline extended to obedience. Trainees faced severe punishments for mistakes, beatings, isolation, or worse. The goal was to create killers who followed orders without question or doubt. Training also included lessons in deception. Assassins learned how to lie convincingly, forge documents, and create false identities. They practiced disguises, accents, and body language to blend into different social classes and cultures. Survival skills were critical. Trainees were taught how to live off the land, find food and shelter, and escape pursuers. They learned to navigate cities and wilderness alike, using secret paths and hidden routes. Some training involved psychological tests, designed to prepare assassins for betrayal and isolation. They experienced loneliness, hunger, and fear to harden their minds. Despite this intense preparation, many trainees didn't survive the process. The harsh conditions and brutal lessons weeded out the weak or unwilling. Only the toughest, most ruthless made it through. Even after training, assassins had to keep practicing. Their skills had to be sharp because one mistake meant death. This brutal preparation was the foundation of their deadly work. It shaped them into tools of violence, feared and hated by all. And that's why being a medieval assassin really sucked from day one. When we talk about medieval assassins, we often focus on the danger, the violence, and the fear. But beyond their brutal lives, assassins left a legacy that shaped history in ways many don't realize. Their actions influenced politics, warfare, and even modern intelligence work. Assassins operated in the shadows, but their impact was anything but hidden. By removing key figures, rulers, generals, or rivals, they changed the course of battles, succession, and power struggles. Some assassinations sparked wars, others ended them. These killers, though secretive, were powerful players in shaping medieval Europe and the Middle East. Take the Hashashin, the medieval order from Persia, often credited with inventing modern assassination tactics. Their name even influenced the English word assassin. They weren't just killers, they were skilled strategists who used fear and surprise as weapons. Their methods inspired fear far beyond their own lands and left a mark on history's approach to covert warfare. In Europe, assassination was a political tool for nobles trying to protect or expand their power. The murder of kings and nobles wasn't rare, and these killings often reshaped alliances and borders. The shadowy acts of assassins brought instability but also forced rulers to rethink security and diplomacy. The use of assassins also influenced the rise of early intelligence systems. To prevent assassinations, rulers developed spy networks and early forms of counterintelligence. This cat-and-mouse game between killers and their targets laid the groundwork for modern espionage. Assassin skills in disguise, infiltration, and gathering secrets were precursors to today's secret agents. Their stories contributed to the development of tactics still taught in intelligence agencies worldwide. On the darker side, their legacy shows the human cost of political violence. Assassinations caused fear, mistrust, and cycles of revenge that lasted generations. Entire families, towns, or kingdoms could suffer because of one secret killing. Yet, assassins also became legends. Their mysterious lives inspired countless stories, myths, and cultural depictions, from Shakespearean plays to modern video games. This legacy shapes how we view secret killers, blending fact and fiction. Understanding the legacy of medieval assassins helps us see history's complexity, not just battles and kings, but the hidden struggles in the shadows. Their lives were brutal, but their impact was lasting. And that's why being a medieval assassin really sucked, but their story still matters today.